You're still on mute.
Oh, Jakub, I think you're on mute. He has the best idea when he's on mute.
What I was saying.
Welcome to the What's Your Baseline podcast. In this show, we talk about our experiences and lessons learned in enterprise architecture and business process management. What's Your Baseline is designed to be for everyone. Newbies who are just getting started with these topics, organizations who want to improve their EA and BPM groups and the value they get from it, as well as practitioners who want to get a different perspective and care about the discipline.
Each episode will tackle different key topics, providing context, background, best practices, and stories from the road, inviting you to learn from our challenges and successes, and demonstrating key tools to help you set up your practice and get the most out of it.
I'm your host, Roland Wolt, and I'm joined today by my co-host, JM Erlinson. Hey, JM, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Roland, and it's very possible you might even be seeing me out there in podcast land, because I'm so excited for today's episode of What's Your Baseline. We've been doing a lot of investigation into EA and BPA and process mining and all these topics in our industry. But we've really been doing it through this format. And so today's episode of What's Your Baseline is such a great opportunity to explore, well, the medium itself. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine, and now we can spill the beans. Actually, we thought we would have this episode as our anniversary episode 50, but then JM, you and I went into ourselves and had deep thoughts, and I thought, hey, 50, that's so boring. Everybody can do that, This is episode 55, so it's twice as good. Yes.
Freedom 55, as we say, right?
America, yes. So anyways, for this wonderful episode, we said we don't want to talk with each other by ourselves, and therefore we invited a couple of guests. And for those of you who might see the video already know, so we have three of our very favorite guests from former episodes on the show. And these are, ladies first, Josèphe Blondaut, who is running two shows about process management, if I count correctly. And then we have Mirko Kloppenburg, who by coincidence in my little video is on the left of Josèphe, who's running his New Process podcast. And last but not least, we have Jakub Dvořák here, who's running actually also two podcasts. One is process related, process mining related, and the other one is something completely weird. And maybe Jakub, maybe we start with you. Talk a little bit about who you are and what you're doing.
Well, first of all, Roland and JM, thanks for invitation. I've been on your podcast before, which was also quite a pleasure. And it's cool to see that the enthusiasm prevails with all of us doing this, because you guys have been doing it for, 2 years now? We are on the same boat. We are a few episodes ahead, but relatively the same time span. And for me, this was more of an exploration journey, because when I started doing Minding Your Business podcast with my co-host, Patrick Bogner, we didn't really know a lot. We were young. We were like 2 or 3 years in the field, and process mining was the only thing we knew about. And as we went on, we started to broaden our horizons and talking to people such as yourself, actually, and seeing there's actually more to that. And the interest kept growing. And, while doing the show, I was thinking, I actually want to, find out more myself. So that actually brought me to different guests, to different topics. And although we try to stick to process mining and somehow frame the show around that, we always go also to different areas such as BPM. We recently did an episode on simulation and so on. So different areas, different topics, and super interesting. And yes, you are right. You mentioned I have a second show, which is a Czech show on personal finance, and it's roughly 10 times larger than the one on process mining. So just an interesting fun fact.
So how to get rich in Czech.
Yeah, sort of.
You have to speak it. So it's a little bit of exclusive show, but if you happen to speak Czech, that seems like a cool thing to do.
Yeah, but I'm sorry, it's nice that you kept your hobby of process management as well.
Yeah, that's what I thought too. And by the way, Jakub, just to have it said, we were not young, but we still didn't have a clue what we were doing when we started this podcast. So we were all in the same boat.
Wait, Roland, are you claiming we somehow have a clue now?
No,
Because
I'm just
that's
saying.
a bit of a stretch.
I'm just saying we're old. That's what I'm saying.
Oh, okay. So we're not we're old and wise, but we're old and still a little.
No,
dumb.
We're old. We're old.
Yeah,
that's it.
just old.
Yeah,
Yes, got
old.
it. Well, let's move on to the next one. Mirko, tell us a little bit about you and just at a high level what podcasts you do. I mean, we've mentioned it a little bit before, but a brief description.
Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me to this show. It's great to be here again. I've been here about a year ago, I think. I'm the host of the New Process podcast, which is my vehicle to explore new ideas on how to rethink processes, on how to get people excited for processes, and to get to a more human-centric BPM approach. So that's basically the core of what I'm exploring in my episodes. And I really love it, talking to people, asking for their expertise, find out what they are doing in their areas, like talking about gamification or community building, and then try to find ways to apply their expertise to processes. For example, how to build a process community. That was one of the ideas based on the community building interview, which I did. And this is what I'm doing to push BPM ahead.
That's super cool.
That's great. And then last but not least, Josèphe, I know you're running actually 2 shows and both are with video. So maybe if you could introduce yourself and your 2 shows a little bit, that would be great.
So as the others, first, thanks for having me today. And I love that we are thinking over country boundaries, over company boundaries, and we just think about processes, the passion, and which role processes have to play in our lives and businesses. So thanks for that, and thanks for doing the show all the time. I'm having 2 series indeed about processes. Well, maybe it's because we've been established 92 already, so we've been very old on the one hand side, and still also we have to learn a lot, as you all do. But what we did is to split our podcast in 2 different series. First, it's based on YouTube. So that's the difference to the other one. So it's not a pure podcast. It's really more showing people, having the views on the people, and seeing the kind of person that is behind the voice. And we split it into passion for processes, which is really about talking with different people from different industry about why do they think that processes have a role to play, whatever you do, wherever you are, whatever kind of business you are in. So that's the first one, which is quite generic on BPM, process intelligence, risk and compliance, you name it. And the second one is some kind of more like a passion of myself, and some very emotional stuff, because I saw we have a lot of women in that area. Even if I'm alone today, we still have a lot of women dealing with a process excellence project, implemented management system in companies, making change in the organization, having a leading role in these transformations. And I wanted to talk to these women and learn from them. Okay, how do they see the topic? What did they learn on the way? And also it has a more personal side, also really, what are the pitfalls? What do you need to take care of as a woman? And it has a different taste from the podcast and content perspective.
And that was exactly the topic of the episode that we had with you and Gabriela Galic, who's also doing some community building around women in process mining. So shout out to Gabriela here. And I think it's very important, right? It's not just white old dudes who do process management. The world is much more colorful. Speaking of which, 4 white dudes on the video anyways. So let's go into the meat of the topic. And we're going to talk about basically 2 major topics in this show today. So one is the first big bucket, and feel free to chime in whenever you think it's your time. The first bucket of questions is around experience with podcasting, right? And how does that fit to your respective discipline? And then the second part of it, after we have a little break, we're going to talk about tips and tricks and lessons learned that we've seen here. So maybe my first question, and whoever wants to answer first, JM, you're also eligible for this.
You're eligible for this, Roland.
Yeah, but I'm asking the question.
We're also podcasters. Okay.
So why did you start podcasting?
Well, then we started podcasting. And basically the first idea was really this woman in BPM. So it was, we started because we we saw the need to discuss with women in that area. We saw in it. We got, that feedback. We saw there needs some kind of a community around women in BPM. And and by chance, I'm a woman, so I just decided, you know what? I just start with the podcast, and I don't think too much about it. Let's get started and let's see how it goes. Without having too many plans, without having too many. Of course, I can talk. Oh, it's important for our image. It's important for people finding us. Okay, that's important. But basically, it came from a feeling. There's something to talk about. There are lots of women, and they have something to say to the markets.
Yeah, and I know it's a similar story, Jakub. If I don't spoil the beans here, I think you and Patrick had similar thoughts when you started yours, didn't you?
Yeah, essentially there was nothing on process mining when we were starting. So we were thinking, let's just go for it. This could be a nice niche, a nice hole to fill. But for me, there were, I think, a little more reasons than just, there's no process mining podcast, let's do one. I think part of it is also, you have to start with genuine interest in the topic. You have to start with this drive, because at the end of the day, you're representing the listeners to an extent. And while you are maybe one step ahead of the listeners because you are creating the materials and talking about the topics, you should have the same hunger for the information as the listener. And that was the case for me and for Patrick when we were starting out with the show. It is still now. And then obviously there's always a little bit of ego in play, and this idea of growth and being visible in the field. I don't think anybody could argue otherwise, that it's also interesting where a podcast can get you to and what kind of audience or opportunities you can reach through the podcast.
Yeah, I agree with that. And then I know that you and Patrick spoke about that because we had the same fear. Are we going to start that thing? And now we have 5 topics that we want to talk about. And what do we do for number 6? And I think that fear never goes away. You're thinking like, oh, what could be the next topic that we're talking about?
Yeah.
And again, I think you had the same.
Well, I can actually jump in here as well about this. It's funny. You talk about a genuine interest, but I feel like I started podcasting not by podcasting at all. I started by making tutorial videos and throwing them up on YouTube and through the Aries community, because I kept getting the same questions over and over. And when you've said the same sentence to a client, 50 times, and you're like, oh my goodness, if you could just self-service this particular answer. And it started with technical answers, which was like, hey, how do I click here to do this thing? Because as a solution engineer, I often I answer to very mechanical questions. And then it went to more philosophical questions like, well, why do I need to approach it like this? What's the value in this part? What have you learned? What are some best practices you'd like to share? And I was thinking, okay, well, now we need a longer form to have a conversation about it. So originally podcasting was just a mechanism of saving time by helping people asynchronously access the knowledge that I've accumulated over my time in the industry. And then it was like, oh, well, this is actually really super fun because I can both be able to share my knowledge and also have a good and wholesome conversation with Roland, and also with a lot of really interesting people in the industry who are also thinking about stuff that they've learned and want to share with others. And it turned from just informative to really fun, informative stuff.
Yeah, and I feel so sorry for you that you have to hang out with me on every episode.
Well, you have a lot of. I'm sure you have the same thing. You have a lot of knowledge. And getting it out of you is a sort of coaxing it into the public sphere rather than keeping it hidden and having to do meetings.
Which actually was one of my motivations to start the whole "What's Your Baseline" thing. Because
Yeah.
I've similar things. You're getting to a certain age, and you're thinking about legacy and what have I learned and all that stuff. And I started to write articles and all that stuff. And at some point I thought, wow, writing is hard. You spend a lot of time. It's like, isn't there another way of doing things? And then I remember, oh, what's that podcasting stuff? You listen to podcasts all the time, and I didn't want to do a podcast by myself because I think it's weird to babble into a microphone. And Mirko, I will talk with you about that in a sec. but it's super weird in my mind. And then I thought, oh, who could I do with? And I remember, JM, when I asked you, it took you about 3 milliseconds to say yes.
It's like, yes,
So
100%.
yes,
100%.
so that was great, and the rest is history, as I say. But Mirko, what was your motivation to get started with that? Because I know you were in a special situation, leaving your former employer, spanning your wings, and I see the little bird in the background, and all that type of stuff. So and you just jumped right in, didn't you?
Yeah, but the story, I would say, starts already 10 years earlier. Because when I listened to a podcast for the first time on my own, since that, it was on my bucket list to host my own show sometime in the future. But the only question I always had, what topic should I talk about? And it was so obvious. So I've been working in process management roles for more than 20 years. And this is the only hobby I have, the only topic I know. But I never realized that this should be the topic of my show. So finally, in the end, when I left Lufthansa, I decided to start a podcast. I took the time to create a concept and prepare everything. And finally, I launched the New Process podcast.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect. So
actually, I have a comment about the New Process podcast. It's funny. You do something that I think is really effective, which is you have a very good newsletter that accompanies a lot of those podcasts, and it feels like you're really trying to hit all the channels at once that leads to the podcast. I like that promotional style. I think it does you really well. And that leads to an interesting sort of second question for folks, because we all struggle with getting, retaining, growing an audience. That starts from nothing. You start from a blank slate and an empty classroom. How do you fill it? So talk to us about your hurdles in getting started on this podcasting journey, and we'll pass it back to you, Mirko, because I think you've done an interesting job with the newsletter that goes along with it. But what other hurdles did you face, and how did you overcome them?
So actually, I booked a course to develop my podcast. I booked, I don't know, I can't remember the name. It was a course offered by Pat Flynn. And this was the host of the first show I listened to. So I had to buy his course to build my own podcast. And there, one of the tools he's using is to build a launch team. And this is what I did when I created the podcast. So I used my little LinkedIn audience at that time to team up with a number of people, to have them as first listeners and to share what I'm doing. Actually, it's really hard. I didn't start inviting guests with a broader reach in the beginning. So I was just purely looking onto content because I was so excited about what I was talking about and what I wanted to explore. So it was really hard in the beginning to get more and more listeners. And I think overall the BPM bubble is pretty small compared to other bubbles out there. And that's my opinion. And I'm curious what you think there with regards to growing listener numbers. That's really hard. But the people that are there, they are coming back and they are frequent listeners, and they are talking to me as well, providing feedback, commenting on LinkedIn. And that's super cool to have this personal interaction with your listeners out there, even if we're not talking about thousands of people, but a small group which is really interested in the topic. That's what I really like about that.
Yeah, that's a topic that I also find interesting. There's a video cast by Christoph Pacher. He's talking about automation and all that stuff, and he's really pulling it off, So if I look at his numbers, it's like, oh yeah, it's about 3,000 per episode and whatnot, and I'm like, whoa,
wow,
okay,
that's a lot of people.
Yeah. So, and I just remember the first time, JM, when we crossed the 100 download mark for an episode, I gave you a ring and said, look, hey, your grandmother dialed in, yay.
but for Christoph, it's different because he's doing the podcast in German. I think it's a different target group than doing that in English. So you cannot really compare the numbers there, I would say. Yeah. But it's awesome, his podcast. So if you are able to listen to German language podcasts, you have to listen to Christoph's podcast as well. Yeah.
For sure. So what were your hurdles, Josèphe and Jakub, on these topics? Whoever wants to go first.
Well, maybe I can start, because that's it's a very different situation on my side, because, well, I'm part of a big structure. There are a lot of big marketing, websites. We have the Aris community in the background. We have Aris News with thousands of subscribers in the background. So, of course, that helps to promote and to make people aware of this specific podcast. But I would not. I think it's important to have an audience. I think it's important that you get the feedback, and if you see that people want to participate in your show, you get the feeling, okay, it's been working and it's working. But in the end, I would really not look at the pure figures. And as you said, Mirko, it's not about thousands of subscribers and listeners. Hey, maybe it's not important. I think that's something we should also take a little bit of freedom from. Not look only at the numbers, but at the engagement that people have with us, at the people asking you privately how much interest they have in the topic and how passionate they are about these topics. And if you have 10 on the one day, 100 in the other day, or 1,000 on the third day, then maybe that's not the point. And I think that's, we're all KPI driven, I'm sure. And of course, I can pull out numbers, but I think the most important thing is really the interest, the reactions, or, when you have a customers from South America asking you, can I please participate in your podcast? I love it. It's really cool. And I want to get my opinion out. That's where I think you did something right. And I'm sure every one of us did that in this round.
Yeah.
So that would be my view on that.
When you receive that message from a person that just says, yeah, I was listening to the podcast when I was driving with my wife to a seaside, and then she told me I have to already stop it because she had enough of business process management topics. So then we are thinking, interesting.
And then you said, no problem, I got that personal finance podcast. Just switch
just switch the gears.
And Jakub, tell us about your hurdles. How what was preventing you from success? How did you overcome that? And as you kick things off.
So our situation was a bit different than all of you guys, because we were literally no ones when we were starting out. We had 2 years of experience working in the field, and suddenly there are 2 guys who start talking about process mining or business process management, and we had no clue. We still might not have no clue, but we are at least getting somewhere, right? And you at least had some experience in the field. You had connections, you had some network and so on, who you could already rely on, at least to an extent, by inviting the people or sharing it with them. We started from scratch. So that was a hurdle. On the other side, it was pretty freeing in a sense that we had nothing to lose. We could talk essentially about anything, and every listener, every follower counted, and it helped us grow tremendously. And then as you keep the consistency and as you keep releasing and you keep grinding, as you would say, in this entrepreneurial spirit, you start getting this word of mouth, and people start noticing, and then it just starts snowballing.
Yeah, Jakub, I do have a follow-up question with that, because it sounded as we had that big Rolodex, if you remember what that is, of people that you could bring in. That's not the case. I'm curious, how do you get guests? Because we're getting at a point right now that we're running out of our friends and family that we can interview on the show, right? So how do you reach out to people that you actually don't know or barely know, and how do you convince them to be part of your show?
Right. Also, interesting question. And I would say I'm pretty good at cold messages. I know how to write it compelling enough for a person to be like, maybe I could actually come to the podcast. And Mirko was one of the first ones who I approached while not knowing him, actually. So he might remember. And ever since, once you start growing this list of people you've had on the show, you start getting confident, and you can always say, oh, this and that person was on my show before. So it gives you some credibility. And I remember, I think the first really, really large speaker we've had on the podcast was Lars Rankemeyer, who was at the time, I think, still with Siemens, or just starting with Celonis back then. Big figure in process mining world. And when I wrote him and he confirmed that he would come, I was just screaming in the room and saying, it's incredible, let's go.
Yeah, Mirko, I get the feeling you want to say something about that topic.
Yeah, I had the same feeling with Will van der Aalst. Yeah, I was really excited when he agreed to be guest on my podcast. So Jakob, I fully agree to what you just said. But in my case, it's a little bit different because I'm using the podcast as a vehicle to explore ideas on how to rethink processes, and I try to fill different areas of the new process lifecycle. So I try to talk to people from different areas of expertise. And I often just look into my LinkedIn stream. Who do I know who is talking about this and that? Like the community building example. I somehow stumbled up on posts from Mika Leinonen about community building, and they were so interesting that I just wrote him a message on LinkedIn and asked him if he would like to be a guest on my show, because I want to know more about what he is doing there. And yeah, he said yes, and we had a super interesting conversation. And that's what I'm trying to do. So whenever I have a topic I'm interested in, I try to find an expert and just approach them and ask them. It's not always successful, but in most cases, yeah, they agreed to do it, to be guest on my show.
It's just funny. It's a similar thing with me reaching out to people who I think are thought leaders, but those are people who I met. It's funny. I'll give away the goose a little bit. A few people who you will have seen on the What's Your Baseline podcast that I've invited in are people who came from my management consulting days, which were more than a decade ago. I mean, it's like almost 15 years now ago. And they're people who in management consulting had their own specialties. And then 15 years later, they're thought leaders in very different parts of the industry. And so they look like they're completely unconnected, but they all come from that seed of management consulting, which sort of is a crucible, brings you all together. And I love them very dearly. We went through we went through hell together in the late 2000s, early 2010s, and so it sort of bonds you as a team. And I call them up later and say, hey, listen, do you want to join the podcast and share some of this experience you've received over the past 15 years we haven't worked together? Oh yeah, sure, sounds good. I remember you were fun to hang out with when we were going through it. And that was a good one. So I mean, it's good to have those people in your back pocket, and particularly when you look at a lot of management consulting firms, they touch on process, if not tangentially, then like actually as part of one of the core things they offer, particularly in system implementation. And so they all have a respect for it. And so when we bring them on, there's like, oh yeah, I know how this works from a process perspective. Like, yes, you're already halfway there. But I want to talk about this and sort of bridge this into the next question for everybody. I'll start with Josèphe, because you talked about the legacy and the length of time that you've been dealing with this. Talk about the interest in BPA and EA and process mining, things like that, particularly in the interest around the best practice sharing and messages. Do you think that the demand for podcasts like this has changed? Has it increased? Has it shifted? Tell me about what you're seeing as the feedback or the asks from our communities online and the communities in the client base for this kind of podcasting best practice sharing. What's changed?
What changed? Is it the community feeling maybe that people do have? So I see huge demand on best practices podcasts, on people telling their stories. So I'd rather talk about stories. So really, people wanting to see, oh, this person, different persons from different industries. How did they do that? How did they succeed in transforming a company? What were the key success factors? What were their best practices? Also in this Women in BPM, looking at, what are the tips, the pitfalls that you should avoid or the tips you should take? So we see a huge demand on that. And I see it increasingly. What I see, which is it new? Is it not new? Or maybe it came with COVID. It's really about connecting the real and the digital world. That's something that is increasingly coming. So of course we have now again customer events, but still we have the need for the digital podcasting, videos, recordings, whatever that you would listen while you're working, while you're traveling with your, your wife in the car. So you have that, and at the same time, you have these people seeing, well, I saw that lady, I saw this guy from this company, and they want to see them live then and share their best practices live, discuss with the people, have some kind of user group gathering, whether it's about the product or just topic mining, modeling, whatever. Yeah. So I see these both worlds are now melting together. And well, they were rather separated before. That's my gut feeling. That would be my take on that. The need for best practices, really honestly, I think, since 92, I've seen that all the time. And that's why we have, for example, management consultant and consultants. Of course, everyone wants to know about best practices, but they want to have from real people they can identify with. I think that's the point.
Yeah, but I agree with you, Joseph. I think, unfortunately, as unfortunate as it is, COVID gave it a big push. People had time.
Yes.
People were listening to podcasts, and then they were finding for their niches. The interesting thing from my perspective is I'm still not really convinced about that, to be quite honest. I think there is a certain group of nerdy people who are interested in that topic, because otherwise we wouldn't have listeners. But I don't know if this goes into the bigger stream. I'm wondering if it's more just like an incestuous community. So like, oh, who had Kevin Tan, our latest guest, while we were recording? Who had Kevin on his show? Make a show of hands. I'm pretty sure it will, that type of stuff. So it's the same group of people. But maybe, Jakub, what are your experience in that? Do you think there's a need for podcasting as a medium, or is it just a nerdy hobby and geeks like us do stuff?
I think it's a combination, Roland. And in your case, it's probably the nerdy side. In our case, it's probably the combination. No, what I want to say is that, again, I'm working with a small sample of last 5 years or so when I am in the field. But what I see in other areas, and I already mentioned at the beginning, I'm also doing personal finance podcast, and there we are talking about banking system and investments and everything. What I see in general is democratizing this information. And even if you look at SAP documentation as of today, it's ridiculously difficult to get some information out of it in somehow way that you can chew and that you can actually understand. And we are in 2023. Imagine what it had to be like 20 years ago when there was, internet was still in its infancy, or 20, 30 years ago, and people had no access to this sort of information unless they visited, I would imagine, pretty expensive roadshows or some conferences. And now you actually bring these speakers, these people who are at the forefront of these ideas, who are the thought leaders, in a show that everybody can consume in their own time, in their own speed, for free, everywhere in the world, which is extremely powerful. And you see it not only in our domain, but basically in every other domain. Because if you take a look at what sort of podcasts are being released, it's on everything. Whether you're interested in riding a horse or brewing your own coffee, there are podcast shows about that, talking to the best or well-known people on the topic, bringing this information out in the world.
I'm guilty of that. I highly recommend a podcast called Filter Stories. It's about coffee. So look it up. It's about the history of coffee and all that type of stuff. But Mirko, what were your experiences on that topic?
I think, and there I have to pick up a story from my past, where we had a colleague in Los Angeles, and she was responsible for process management in the subsidiary of our company. And she was flying into Germany once a year to talk to like-minded people from other locations. And she told us when she is flying back to Los Angeles with all this energy from the personal meeting and talking to like-minded people, that gives her new energy to fight for processes in Los Angeles, because she was the only one fighting for processes. And I think it's also similar with podcasts. So people are listening. Often they are the only person being accountable or responsible for BPM in their organization, have only a few people supporting them, and they really like the exchange or listen to stories of other people with same suffering stories. And this for me ends up in, we need a meeting in person in the future. So I'm getting a lot of messages, and at the end we're talking about, let's meet in reality sometime. And I think we also talked about that when we had our podcast session last year. That's why I'm now planning to set up a new process conference for next year. to have an in-person meeting of the community, not limited to new process. I think it's for the whole BPM bubble there. And this demand is also there, in addition to just listening to stories of other people fighting for BPM, I would say.
It sounds like this is a way of helping practitioners feel less alone.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Particularly when you're the only one who's steering the ship of process in your organization, or at least you're somebody who's responsible for it, or you're just a concerned citizen who wants to make the world a little bit more process-centric. And I love it. I can see that in all of us here today. And I want to take us to a bit of a break. I know we're about half an hour in, which means people's brains are starting to get a little tired. So we use music as a palate cleanser. But in the meantime, we'll give you the chance to think about a couple of questions you might be pondering after hearing some of the responses from our wonderful guests today. Think about yourself. How do you communicate your ideas, your thoughts, your best practices to the community around you? And in doing so, what's worked? What stood in the way of getting your message out? We'll take a brief break and come back with our second section, tips, tricks, and lessons learned.
Where did you go? All I have is your echo. All I have is your echo.
And welcome back. Very interesting topics about your experiences in process management and process mining and podcasting, about all that wonderful stuff. But the one thing that I'm always interested in is, what were your favorite moments in your podcasting days? And now I give you 30 seconds to think about. Mine was, for example, when I was in a client meeting, first time, never met any of those people there. And then I said something along the lines of, oh, the weather is nice today, isn't it? So that type of quality. And during that, I got a direct message in Zoom, like, oh, I recognize that voice, keep up the good work. I like your podcast. I was like, I never met that person, but I'll take it. Thank you. So what were your favorite moments?
I had the exact same experience when I was visiting a client's office, and then a person from another room actually came in there and was like, I knew it was you. I knew that voice. So it's super interesting to get these completely unforeseen encounters of people who you never interacted with in any way, but who have been listening maybe every now and then, but have been listening to the show and are aware of what you're saying. And then if you mention something personal on the show, they might even know about that, and they're like, so yeah, how's that thing of yours going and doing? So those are definitely interesting encounters.
I had people reaching out to me like, hey, do you have an hour? I'd like to chat with you, and I chatted with them, and obviously it was interesting, and they said, yeah, I got the feeling I know you. And I said, yeah, that's kind of weird, isn't it?
Yeah, I had the same. So I have a link to book a meeting with me on my website, and from time to time meetings pop up in my calendar, and people would like to just say hello who listen to my podcast. And I said, I did not believe that this meeting will really take place, and you are there, and you are the one from the podcast, right? And now we're talking here more or less online, face to face, and that's always nice. And I love to learn more about the people who are listening to my podcast.
So Josèphe, what was your favorite moment in your steep podcasting and videocasting career?
Well, it depends. Is it a favorite moment within the
Either way,
podcast,
either way.
while recording, or outside the podcast? While talking to people and really recording the podcast. As you can tell, I'm the kind of emotional person, so I really enjoy when people start to open themselves and really start talking, the truth and how they really feel about processes and what was really difficult in their career and transformation projects. So these kind of moments I really love. Whereas I have one of my favorite moments is from the Passion for Processes recording, where we had Abdulatif one of our customers, and I keep asking an analogy on what is business process management. So I always say, oh, what if you would have to explain that to your grandma? What would you take? And well, he took one of the nicest analogy I ever had, because it was talking about the different moon phases for business process management. So it is starting, it's growing, it is a cycle, it's come back. So I really like this. That was one of my preferred moments. Um, at the beginning, you mentioned like ego somehow, and probably, of course, it has to do something with the ego. So when I'm at a user group, and you have people indeed coming to you and say, oh, you're the one from the podcast, and I would like to be in your show and love it, and I've learned so much, and I like this episode and this episode. Well, it feels pretty good. And at this point of time, you think, okay, obviously there's something good about it.
Yeah, it sounds like this is actually it affects you personally to have these experiences, which is so cool. I always so behind the scenes I say, I don't want to just trade my life, my blood for money. As in just I spend time at a job and then the job gives me cash and then I die old. That feels like a really sad thought for a life. Whereas if you can feel really invested in something, you can connect with it. I mean, the words passion for processes, I mean, that by itself is an emotional word. Those are you are creating
Yeah.
a relationship
Yes.
between you and your subject matter, one not of convenience or of obligation, but of true intention. You've selected this as you have a passion for it, which I love.
That-
One of the things that we think about is how does having a podcast affect you personally? How does it affect your career, and how does it affect the organization that you represent for along the line? So, what do you see some outcomes of this process? And then I'll ask our other folks on the panel as well that.
Yeah, but I would like to jump back onto this passion for processes, and was that it has brought to me, honestly, maybe a little bit of image for the product, maybe a little bit of more spreads of process mining, process analysis, process management. Yes, but indeed it has shown that processes can be something that people are passionate about. That's what it brings to me. So it's really, as you mentioned, this passion for processes, this passion for doing something, and it's not about the business, the salary, the money that we get on that. It's really living something you like and you love. And you just mentioned connection.
Yeah.
So connection to your subject matter, yes, to your processes, but connection with the people. That's in the end what counts, because we say, yeah, people, processes, that belongs together. So being connected with people that are passionate about the processes, that do have the same kind of motivation, want to learn and get some new ideas and improve in their areas. That's what's it has brought to me, basically.
I appreciate that. And Mirko or Jakub, one of you jump on this as well. What do you think about what podcasting has done for you, your career, your company? How does it affect you, and why?
Well, a lot, to be honest. First of all, I learned how to speak, at least in Czech, on the Czech podcast. The English is still questionable. I still hate listening myself. I always hear this Czech accent. I'm like, oh man, I should work on that for sure. But in all seriousness, it brought a lot. So I already mentioned that when we were starting, we were a really unknown company, unknown people. And it brings credibility, and being on a projects where you have people who've been in business process management often for 15, 20 years and longer, and then you jump on the call and try, you start persuading them what you're doing, what you've been taught and what you've been doing for years is all wrong. Look at the data here and do it differently. It resonates in a different way when you can also point them into what you've been producing for a few years and who you talk to and whose ideas you're eventually adopting. Because I'm not going to lie that this is all from my head. Actually, very little is from my head, and it's just being able to tell the story of other people who have been doing this for a while. And this narrative and this ability to tell the stories also to customers, to people who are interested in the topic, just creates so much more trustworthiness to me as a person and to us as a company than what we would have otherwise.
Yeah, I agree. And Mirko, obviously running the process podcast, New Process Lab has been a passion of yours, and it seems like what you're focusing on right now. What do you get back from that?
A lot of super interesting people, I say. I haven't known these guys before, and they approach me via LinkedIn, just send me an email. They tell me, I listened to your podcast, and can we talk about this and that? Or even I was guest in another show, and I just received afterwards a message on LinkedIn from a listener, and she wrote, I'm just listening to your episode there. I would love to learn more about. And then we met, and I learned about what she is doing. And she was working in that example on story listening. And I thought, wow, that's super interesting. Let's do an episode on story listening and try to find out how to apply that to processes. And we did that. And I did a recap to find out more detailed how to use story listening to improve process modeling sessions. So as an example, to ask the participants of a process modeling sessions, how did you feel last time when you executed this process? What are the emotions, the feelings that you're having, and so on? So get to these more softer aspects in this sometimes very cold process management world. Ask about emotions and feelings. And one of my customers I'm working with listened to that episode, and we talked about that, and we tried that out in process modeling sessions and workshops we had there. And it was more or less a running gag in the end, that at the end of the process modeling sessions, we had always this questions: how do you feel about what we did or what you experienced today? And just to offer this space that the people can talk about their feelings, that's a super weapon, I would say. And I can only recommend to the people out there, try it out. Ask the people for emotions, and that's a big part of new process to get to more human-centric process approach. And I love that. And that was just, I don't know. She listened to another episode, wrote me an email. We talked about that. We did a cool episode. And finally, we had this approach for process modeling sessions.
Yeah, I think, and I think my experience in this is a mix of what you just said. I see it like Josèphe said, it's part of what you do or Jakub said, as part of a corporate visibility. You gain credibility and you do stuff and whatnot, but also on a personal side. I tell everyone and their grandmother, I think I would not have the job that I have today if I wouldn't have done the podcast, because what you do is you position yourself as an authority, even though in opposite to Jakub, I haven't written a book about stuff which is still on the bucket list item, but that's a different story.
Yet. You haven't written a book
Yet. So we'll see what happens there. But maybe, and we're getting close to the hour, and I know some of us have a hard stop. I have one more question before we go into where can we reach you question is, what are your, I would say, hard-earned best practices that you've learned that help propel you to success in podcasting? So if I was the newbie, and I still feel a little bit like a newbie after 55 episodes, if I was a newbie, what would be your recommendation for me to get started with podcasting? And maybe Jakub, you're the granddaddy of both podcasts and have a gazillion episodes under your belt. Maybe you take this first. What's your recommendation for me?
I think I'm closing to 150 altogether in 2 shows.
Show off. You show off.
One recommendation I would have is just consistency. Just stick, create a plan that is doable for you, whether it's weekly, bi-weekly, or even monthly basis, and stick to it no matter what, and always be harsh at yourself at delivering when you need to deliver. As easy as that. And if you stick to that, you will create this frequency, this urgency, and you will always have this a little bit on the back of your mind that you need to create the new episode, which sometimes can be pretty frustrating, that you always have to create new and you can't really live in this moment. Oh, I now recorded 5 in a row or 5 in 2 weeks, and in a month I will have to do this over and over again. But it's the only way for success. You have to repeat what works and keep the consistency.
a good one. Mirko, I saw your hand as well.
Yeah, but what Jacob just said builds a lot of pressure. And for the first time, I had a summer break now, and because there was no chance, I'm still producing more or less just in time. So recording and then releasing about 2 or 3 weeks later. And some of the recordings which were scheduled had to be rescheduled. And so there was a summer break, but it's going to continue now. And this really released a lot of pressure from myself that I had this break now, and even try to stay consistent there. So I fully agree to what Jacob just said. And my advice would be prepare for your guest. Learn a lot about the guest you're having on the show, about their history, their experience. And I'm always creating a guideline or a flight plan for my interviews. And I share that with the people so that they can think about what is coming up there. We edit that on a shared document, and then we go into the show. So have a good flight plan for your episode. That's my recommendation.
Yeah, we do that a little bit, as the three of you all know. We do that a little bit differently. We let the guests do the heavy lifting, and come up with an initial draft of the outline, because in our opinion, the guests know best what they want to talk about, and then we try to edit around it and whatever. Then JM and I point at each other who's going to ask the next question and all that type of stuff. So, Josèphe, what are your tips for Roland the newbie?
I would agree on the last point from Mirko. Prepare. So I always have a first interview with my guests. I take notes, and as you said, I share that with them. I ask them, okay, is there something you especially want to talk about? Is there specifics that you know about? And is there something we should
Yeah.
really not talk about? Also, that I'm asking. So preparation is everything. And at this point of time, it gives you the opportunity to really get to know the person you are talking to, which helps really. And maybe an additional small point: get into your niche topic. So find your topic. And I mean, of course, we have process mining and process management, but I do feel from my perspective and what I did, it's much more successful to look at these specifics, women in process mining, in BPM, that's funny, women in BPM, than just talking about BPM. So having your specialty, this is your podcast, that's what you can talk about and what people relate with your face or with your voice in the end. I think this is important. And maybe last but not least, be yourself. And that's it. We see different personalities. We are all very different. So being yourself and not playing a role
Yeah.
in being someone else, that doesn't work. That's you in the podcast.
Agreed. And by the way, I see a future podcast in the works. I know Gabriela is doing something, and the two of you were collaborating. So maybe there is a Women in Process Mining podcast in our near future. Hint, hint, hint. But I agree, Josèphe. I think being yourself and also entertaining yourself. I don't want to do a show with somebody who I don't like, or where there's no fun on it and everybody is just whatever having a grimace and it's like and I just want to have a nice conversation with nice people, because why should I spend my time with people that I don't like?
Well, isn't it a great quote? The "be yourself, everyone else is already taken." I think that's one of my favorite quotes out there, and it's a good one. I think that one of there's two key lessons that I've learned that I want to take away and share. If you're just getting started, and I've actually spoken to a couple of folks who have since started their own podcasts. I mean, shout out to Strategist and Dan Marquez, who's fantastic. First and foremost is test your tech. Sounds like a really sort of course you do, but no, don't just test your tech. Test a bunch of different types of technologies till you find one that really works for you. Because getting not just a consistent release schedule, but a consistent show workflow for how to make it has been a huge boon to helping us deliver at least on time enough.
Yeah. And as you know,
Oh, boy.
some professionally deformed podcasters even have a process model in
I know we
their
do.
Notion, Yes.
But like I've gone through, I think this is our podcast recording software that we're currently on, number 5.
Yeah.
And I've gone through at least that number of different editing softwares, and I'm on the the third or fourth AI powered noise reduction software, and I'm on my third microphone, and like I've gone through a bunch of different tech to try and find something that really worked for me. And so test your tech. Also consult with experts. So besides the music you heard on today's podcast coming from Jeremy Voltz, and I have lots of friends who are in the music industry who help me. I speak to people all the time to say, hey, you're a professional voice editor, you're a professional, this particular part of the technology. Give me some advice. What would you use here? So I just spoke to a good friend of mine, Kai Koshmeter, and he helped me fix the EQs that Roland and I use for our voices because they were a little bit out of whack. And I was like, what are those sorts of things? Test your tech, work with experts. The second piece of advice that I have, and I think this is really important to me personally, is talk about stuff you care about. If you don't want to record a podcast episode because you don't care about the subject matter, don't do it. Nothing was worse than releasing something where you're clearly 50-50 on actually being in the room. If you want to be in the room for a podcast, you want to be there 100%. And find stuff you care about and talk about the stuff you care about. Roland and I did an episode on gamification, and it was spurred by a couple of serious conversations I had with a couple of my clients who were really worried about the idea of privacy and of employee performance evaluation and of the impact that would have on morale and on their own personal jobs and livelihood. And I thought, we really need to have this conversation. I care about this topic. And, I didn't think I would care about it, but, after having a really personal conversation with a client, it became apparent that we needed to have a conversation with our community about this. And that's the kind of podcast I want to record, not one where I'm talking about the next thing in this list of things that I think the industry demands from. No, just talk about what you care about, and the rest will follow. And Roland, what's your number one tip you've learned before we run out of time for the episode? Your number one tip.
I think I said it, be yourself. I'm 100%
Be
with Joseph. This is
Yeah.
your show. Literally, this is your show. You should have fun doing this. This is not work.
This is fun. Well, that's a really good place to take us out for the episode. Think back yourself. What do you care about? What things would you want to talk about if you had the platform of a podcast? And what practices do you take from your regular communication you think you might want to bring into a show format? How might you create something that you think the market and you think your listenership and community might really love? We'll leave you for a moment to daydream about your podcasting future and come back with our final thoughts and how to reach each of our guests.
I thought that we could stay together with nothing in common, but our dreams of being somebody new. Two lovers in Paris, drinking coffee on the terrace in the evening. Yeah, we think about running away. Yeah, we think about running away. You keep your seatbelt on for hours. Parked in
And welcome back. So thanks, guys, for being on the show. It was awesome. I think everybody learned something from the personal experience that you do, that each of you are mini celebrities, which is awesome. But obviously now the question that you're famous, and I hope we can help with that status a little bit. The question is obviously, well, how can I reach those guys? What is the way to contact them? What is next? And that might be the interesting question. What is next for you? What is the whatever big highlight that you have on your show, or whatever you want to talk about? Jakub writes his 25th book about personal finance, for example. And speaking of which, Jakub, let's start with you. Where can people reach you, and what's next for you?
Well, we all live in the world of LinkedIn, so I think that would be the easiest place to go. I'm pretty active there, so you can either find me commenting on stuff or posting some posts myself, or you can just send me a message there. And the thing I'm currently looking forward to and sort of working on is a promotion of an ICPM conference. So that's International Conference on Process Mining, as Mining Your Business is technically an official media partner of this conference. And we are helping with the promotion of this. So that's pretty exciting. We will be there live on site. So nice things ahead for sure for our show.
And that is taking place when and where?
In Rome in October, I think 25th to 27th.
All right.
So if you want to talk in person, I'll be there.
Yeah, we're gonna put our fanboy and fangirls stuff on and all travel to Rome. See, Josèphe, I see you're completely excited about this. So where can people reach you and what's next for you?
So for me, the word of LinkedIn, yes, of course. So you can find me on LinkedIn, so Josèphe Blondaut. The next places to find me are indeed the ARIS community or aris.com, where we have a list of all these podcasts and a lot more, of course. So these are the 3 places. We probably meet at a CPM then, Jacob. That's interesting. So I think I like it. And we also have, of course, several different events in the Netherlands. And, maybe the next big thing, because we were talking community, is our upcoming partner meeting in the fall, which we will held in Saarbrücken, where we all meet, not digitally, but in real person, and discuss best practices on process and process mining.
All right. So last but not least, Mirko, where can people find you and what's next for you?
So you can easily find the New Process Podcast on your favorite podcast platform by searching for New Process Podcast, or go to newprocesslab.com, which is my website where I'm bringing all the things together. Easiest way to reach out to me personally, just send me a message on LinkedIn. Just look for Mirko Kloppenburg. And I'm currently planning, as I already said, a New Process conference for next year. So if you miss the conferences this year, maybe that's a good chance to meet in person. And maybe JM, that's a good chance for you to visit your headquarters again, because currently we are planning for the area of Frankfurt, and we'll see. So that's what I'm doing right now. I'm also working on a course on how to get people excited for processes. But this might take some more weeks until this is released. So that's what I'm doing right now.
Well, those are some exciting things.
Yeah, and of course, we're going to put all the links in the show notes, So if you're watching this video while driving, which you shouldn't do, don't pull out your pencil and take notes. Public service announcement,
All those public service announcements, keeping people safe on the road, as Roland often does. But of course, he speaks of the show notes, and this is a great opportunity to say thank you to our audience. I mean, all 5 of us would not be here, would not be smiling, thinking about our individual podcasts and this podcast together if it wasn't for you, the audience, the folks who interact with us, who give us great feedback, who are the listeners and the collaborators that we love very dearly. So a huge thank you to all of you for being here today. Please go to the website, whatsyourbaseline.com, for this episode specifically, /episode 55. Reach us on LinkedIn, send us a message. We've got tons of really great feedback, people you'd like to see, topics you'd like covered, great feedback, or just comments from the peanut gallery about this episode in particular. It's been a great opportunity to chat with all of you today, and it's great to chat with all of our audience online. But we have to leave you for the afternoon. This has been a really good huge thank you to our guests as well for coming on today and for making really cool content online and sharing it with the world. But until we meet again, friends, and until the next one, I've been JM Erlandson.
I am Mirko Kloppenburg.
I am Josèphe Blondaut.
And I am Jakub Dvořák.
And my name is Roland Wold.
And we'll see you in the next one.